training series on the sustainable management of food in tourism, brought to you by the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. Thank you all very much for your interest and for connecting. This second session is focusing on the role of procurement as a strategy to enhance the sustainable management of food in tourism. I'm Virginia Fernandez-Trapa, Program Officer at the Sustainable Development of Tourism Department in UNWTO, coordinating One Planet related activities. And it is my pleasure to be facilitating the session today in collaboration with my colleague, Svitlana Mikalieva, coordinator of the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program based in the United Nations Environment Program, UNEP. We will start today with opening remarks from the Ministry of Ecological Transition, Territorial Cohesion, Energy Transition and the Sea of France. The Ministry of Ecological Transition is our co-lead in the implementation of the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program. Then we will briefly introduce the joint program on sustainable food, where we are collaborating with other UN agencies and which provides the context for the implementation of these trainings. And lastly, we will move into the actual training on procurement, followed by a questions and answers session. Please note that the mics and cameras of participants are disabled for the session. We nevertheless welcome your questions, your participation via chat throughout the session. Please try to indicate who is asking the question, which organization is asking the question when you type it, or otherwise use the right click of the mouse to try to rename yourself, marking your organization and name. We will try to address as many questions as possible during the Q&A. And please note that we are recording. So if you stay with us, we assume that we have your consent to later post the video on the website and disseminate. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to our co-lead, Mr. Olivier Deteille, Head of International and Multilateral Governance Unit of the Ministry of Ecological Transition, Territorial Cohesion, Energy Transition and Sea, for his welcome remarks. Mr. Deteille, thank you so much for your support. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Virginia. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you read me loud and clear. I'm very glad to introduce such a webinar, and hopefully it will be successful and really interesting. To start, I would say that there is a close link between tourism and food industries. On the one hand, the tourism sector relies largely on the food service activities, and on the other hand, this sector represents major business opportunities for the food industry and all the actors working in the supply chains, as well as promoting local products and cultural food heritage. France is said to be a good example of these synergies between tourism and food sector. The bridge between sustainable agricultural production and sustainable tourism consumption relies on an efficient and sustainable food supply chain from the producer to the consumer. Procurement is a key lever to change food consumption and production patterns in the tourism industry, as it has potential to influence production at initial stages, as well as choices of products that will be consumed by tourists. Hence, capacity building and empowering tourism practitioners on this particular aspect is key if we want to implement a sustainable tourism in favor of professionals, consumers, and producers. As one of the co-leaders of the Sustainable Tourism Program, France is actively engaged in achieving Sustainable Development Goal number 12 through its action in the 10 YFP, and we are pleased to see the diversity and the size of the audience today. If we want to have concrete results quickly, it is essential to work with tourism professionals to target critical sectors such as food procurement. With these few forwards, I wish you a fruitful, pleasant, and interesting webinar. Thank you, and I let the floor back to you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Deteille, for your inspiring introductory remarks. Dear colleagues, I now leave you in the good hands of my colleague Svetlana Mikhailieva, who will continue facilitating the session. Svetlana.
Thank you so very much, Virginia, for the introduction, and thank you so much, Olivier, for setting the scene for today's training session and for the very precious support of the French government. So today's session is part of the deliverables of a joint project titled Promoting Sustainable Food Consumption and Production Patterns Through Integrated Tools, Advocacy and Multi-Stakeholder Action, which is supported by the One Planet Multi-Partner Trust Fund for Sustainable Development Goal 12. Some of you may have already learned about this project on Tuesday. I will provide a brief recap of the project to those who couldn't be with us during the previous training session. So the Multi-Stakeholder Trust Fund is connected to the activities of the One Planet Network, which, as many of you know, has the mandate from the United Nations General Assembly to support the implementation of SDG 12 on sustainable consumption and production by 2030. And the project is implemented by 4 UN agencies, namely the World Tourism Organization, UNEP, UNDP, and FAO. And the project addresses issues such as provision of support to governments around capacity building on sustainable food systems and development of a framework of action on food systems and tourism industry through major entry points and levers such as food waste reduction and procurement. In addition, the project links implementation of sustainable food systems to a climate action, and this connects with the work that we are doing under the Glasgow Declaration on Climate Action in Tourism. Next slide, please. I would like also to drive your attention to a repository of tools and resources built by our program and related to sustainable management of food in tourism industry. In this repository of tools, you can find toolkits on food waste reduction, guidelines on sustainable management of food and tourism, as well as awareness raising and training materials. In this database of tools, you can also find the Sustainable Food Manual published by Futurist, who is our partner for for organization of this online series, training series. And Futurist is a German NGO, and its members are tour operators, hotels, and destinations. They stand for preserving the heritage of holiday destinations and developing a sustainable future for the travel industry. Futurists have extensive experience implementing research and projects on sustainable food, including projects in hotel and cruise lines. Next, please. So this series of the trainings that we are organizing in partnership with Futurists are covering topics such as procurement, preparation of food, consumption aspects, as well as food waste. And in today's training, we will be focusing on the role of procurement in sustainable food systems. And as mentioned by the distinguished representative of the French government in his opening remarks, food procurement policies can significantly reduce climate impacts, protect and promote biodiversity, increase fairness along supply chains, and support local communities. So this online training session will present the key aspects to consider in sustainable food procurement policies, such as sourcing climate-friendly and organic food, and this training will be also covering sourcing of local food. I therefore have the pleasure and honor to give the floor to our trainer, Dr. Dagmar Lund-Durlacher. Dagmar is a professor of tourism management and currently works at the University of Sustainable Development Eberswalde in Germany and at the Institute for Sustainable Tourism in Vienna in Austria. Dagmar is author of numerous scientific publications in the field of corporate social responsibility, tourism and climate change, and sustainable food. And together with Futurist, she has conducted a number of research projects on sustainable food and tourism. Dagmar, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much, Svetlana. Hello and good afternoon. It's a great pleasure for me to be here today and to talk about sustainable food procurement policies. yeah, some of you might have participated in the first training where we introduced the fundamentals of sustainable food. Today, we are talking about the aspects which must be considered in a sustainable food procurement strategy. And you see these aspects on this first slide, and it was already mentioned. Next slide, please. I jump into the first issue already. So the first aspect I want to address is the climate crisis. And I want to show how our food choices can affect the greenhouse gas emissions quite tremendously. So the first consideration, or the basic consideration about where greenhouse gas emissions come from in food services are illustrated on this slide because they explain why food is such an important lever for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. So greenhouse gases occur in food production, so that's mainly in agriculture, but also then with packaging and transportation of the food, and then with storage and food preparation, and last but not least on waste. And why is it so climate damaging? There are different greenhouse gases released. The one we talk most about are CO2 emissions, which are released through energy consumption, mainly in transport and storage, also in packaging and in the preparation of food. But then we have another or two other quite important greenhouse gases to consider in the context of food, which is methane, which is released through livestock farming and which is about 25 times more climate damaging than CO2 emissions. And then we also have nitrous oxide, which is, for example, released in artificial fertilizer production, and which is even about 300 times more climate damaging than CO2. So you see here that we are faced with quite some challenges here. How can we influence the amount of greenhouse gases we produce in food procurement? So we have our greenhouse gas emissions depend on three main factors: the production methods which is used when producing food, the type and the distance of transport, and the food item itself. So the next slide, please. Here there are some facts and figures about transport-related CO2 emissions. So CO2 emissions per ton of food are highest for air freight and far lower for trucks, railways, and shipping. You see the numbers here. And therefore, transport relations are smaller for regional food products, as the distance is an important determinant of emissions. And so buying local food reduces the CO2 emissions related to transport. Next slide, please. Besides the transport distances, also the production methods have an influence on CO2 emissions. So, for example, vegetables which are grown in greenhouses, which are heated with conventional fossil fuels, can cause up to 50 times higher emissions than vegetables grown in the open. Also, food from organic production is generally more climate friendly because organic fertilizers are used instead of the very energy intensive artificial fertilizers. And you can see here in the blue bar that life cycle assessment for dairy, wheat, bread, and vegetable shows that 10 to 35% lower CO2 emissions for organic products than of conventional food. So organic production and the avoidance of greenhouses which are heated with conventional fossil fuels reduce the CO2 emissions. Next slide, please. Yeah, so also the different food items have different emit different greenhouse gases. And in this graph, you see that meat and dairy products, as well as fish and seafood, are among the most carbon-intensive products, while fruit and vegetables and cereal products cause lower greenhouse gas emissions. Here in this slide, you see the average amount of green gases done or retrieved from a meta review of more than 500 studies. But the range of greenhouse gas emissions vary considerable within the categories, because they are very much dependent on the cultivation methods and also the place of production. So next slide, please. Yeah, that's a tool which I would like to share with you, because the food and beverage supply chain, the food items, they offer a great potential for greenhouse gas savings. And footprint calculator or footprint calculators helps you to actually identify the ways how to reduce this carbon footprint or this greenhouse gas footprint. And there is one website which I can recommend. It's the website of Earth Day, which offers a selection of different greenhouse gas calculators, where you can actually calculate the greenhouse gas emissions for your food choices. And one example I would like to highlight here, because it also shows, how these food calculators function. It's the food calculator from the Vegan Society. And this is available for free, and it's an excellent tool for calculating the carbon footprint of individual meals, because it's easy to use. You just have to enter your ingredient, which you can choose from a drop-down list, and then you have to select the country of origin for each ingredient, and then you enter the amount you have in your meal. And after entering all this data, you get the carbon footprint of the meal. And I can highly recommend to try out this tool. Yeah, there are many, I have said, there are many carbon calculators available. And when choosing a calculator, you always have to keep in mind the database which is behind it, and it's recommendable to really use calculators of your own country or of your own region, because it always depends on the database which is behind. And there are regional variations. Next slide, please. Yeah, when we talk about food procurement or food sourcing, we also need to consider packaging. Because also packaging, which comes with the transportation, with the storage of food, can reduce the carbon footprint, especially aluminium foils, metals, or plastics. These are very harmful packaging materials. It is also advisable to prefer larger containers, which can be reused. Recent studies showed that the production of and transportation, both for production and transportation of 1 liter of beer resulted in emissions which were 15 to 40 times higher or lower than when using recyclable bottles. So it's really good to use bigger bulks of products and to use reusable packaging. Also for hotels and restaurants, it's important to single out or to phase out single packaged items and prefer reusable packaging, dispenser systems, and packaging which is recyclable and compostable, because all this have an impact on the greenhouse gas emissions. Yeah, next slide, please. So what can we do? What can we do to ensure that the procurement policy is climate friendly? So it's a summary of what I just presented, all the impact factors to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So it's important to use a greater share of regional products to avoid transport emissions, so the closer the better. And thus it's important to develop local supply chains. It's also recommendable to use seasonal and organic products whenever possible, because they also avoid greenhouses, also reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Then to buy less meat, especially beef and seafood and dairy products, and to offer attractive vegetarian alternatives instead, and to reduce and avoid packaging material. Also using a footprint calculator will help to create climate-friendly meals and menus. Next slide, please. And I'm going to talk about biodiversity loss, which is accelerating worldwide. Studies indicate that about 1 million species of the animal and plant groups are now threatened with extinction if we do not take action. And here I want to present you one slide which shows, this biodiversity, this accelerating biodiversity loss. It's the Living Planet Index from WWF, or World Wildlife Fund, which tracks the populations of mammals, birds, fish, and reptiles. And they revealed that the wildlife population decreased by an average of 69% since 1970. And this is a nice illustration which shows that. Next slide. Yeah, and which regions are most threatened by this biodiversity loss? You can see this on this figure or graph. You can see that Latin America is most threatened, followed by Africa and the Asia Pacific region. So this is quite alarming, and yeah, we see that there is a need for action. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what can we do to support biodiversity? So of course, we should purchase food which is produced with a lower environmental impact. So for example, organic food or food which is meeting other sustainability standards. So we can watch out for certificates which signal that or secure that it is meeting this environmental sustainability standards. Then also to purchase food that is produced without destroying ecosystems, such as the tropical or mangrove forests, or also destroying marine ecosystems. There are especially some products which we have to watch carefully. It's palm oil, for example, soy, coffee, cacao, fish products, which are especially sensitive. And we can avoid to buy products when we look at products, harmful products, if we look for trustworthy sustainability labels. Then food waste is always a topic because, of course, it also harms the environment. So to implement measures which reduce the food waste, also implement measures to reduce the use of animal products, because they have a disproportionate high impact on biodiversity. Then what also would benefit the biodiversity is that we purchase more old and rare varieties to promote agrobiodiversity, because we have about 6,000 plant species cultivated for food worldwide, but only a little less than 200 species really contribute substantially to the global food supply. So this is quite worrying in terms of food security, as the fewer varieties are grown, the greater the risk of crop losses due to pests or extreme weather events is. So also to encourage the purchase of buying more old and rare varieties. Next slide, please. Yeah. Organic production is an important factor when to promote biodiversity. And since this is the factor, we'll have a deeper look into this. The main principles of organic agriculture are the low use of external energy through fertilizers, for example, and also using natural self-regulating mechanisms, so like crop rotation is one of the most best known, and closed resource circles. Also, in organic production, there is a use of natural plant protections instead of chemical ones, and animal welfare is also on the focus. Yeah, organic products also offer other benefits, such as they are healthier than conventional alternatives. Also, farm workers experience a healthy working environment because there are no toxic sprays used and so on. And it's also good for the economy and creates more jobs, because organic production is more labor intensive than conventional food production. Next slide, please. So what can we do to increase the share of organic food in our menus? We can look for organic labels, because they inform us about meeting certain sustainability standards in the food production. So you have to find trustworthy organic labels. There are many labels on the market, and the requirements for organic, but you have to be careful with organic certificates, because the requirements for organic certification vary very much from country to country. There are many national seals available, and you really should have a look if they meet hard sustainability standards, like, avoiding fertilizers, pesticides, antibiotics, and so on. Certification is overseen either by the government or non-profit organizations or private companies. And there is an international directory on organic food, wholesale and supply companies. It's a good website to find international organic labels and to get information on these labels. And I want to share another good website, which is the one from the International Market Labeling Guide, because they explain very well what is behind this term organic. So how is organic defined? Because there are clear standards what is organic. Yeah, so besides looking for these certifications, there's often this argument, we can't introduce or we can't buy organic products because they are so expensive. So one advice is not to start with the most expensive organic products. So very expensive are meat products, for example, but there are other ingredients which you could buy in an organic form, which are where the price is much lower, like potatoes or flour. But there are vegetables that are usually have a lower price. Then to reduce this price, or to have a better price, you can buy directly from the producer. So if you buy directly from the producer or from an agricultural cooperative, it's often cheaper than when bought from a wholesaler, and you also enter a good cooperation with the local producer. And when you decide for organic, to increase your share of organic products, or to fully adjust your offer to organic products, you should promote it, because it is an important topic for your guests and they value organic food. And many studies also show that they are willing to pay more. So therefore, when you offer organic products, you have to make them stand out from the crowd. So you have to present them in a very attractive way and inform your guests about this offer. Next slide, please. Just one example, yeah, of a hotel in Austria where I'm from, which is offering organic food, of completely 100% organic food offer with great success. It's a hotel and it serves exclusively organic dishes. It's traditional Tyrolean dishes and modern gourmet cuisine, so very high quality. And their credo is from the garden to the plate. And this is also reflected in their menus. And they have food and drinks from organic food and drinks from the neighborhood, like cheese or organic veal. And they also have created their own garden called Sehnsuchtsgarten, which means the garden of longing, which is really a major attraction for their guests. Because they can explore and linger there, and it also provides fresh salads, beets and herbs for the kitchen. So it's an awarded hotel, and it is successful for over 25 years. Next slide, please. Yeah, another topic related to biodiversity are the marine species. So many marine species are endangered because of overfishing, illegal or destructive fishing, as well as climate change. And you see here some shocking facts, like 61% of the world's commercial marine fish stocks is fully exploited and 29% are overfished. Also, aquaculture is not the 100% solution, yeah. Although over half of the seafood eaten around the world is already stemming from aquaculture, but it has to be done in a responsible way. Also, aquaculture can support overfishing, yeah, since the feed often consists of fish meal or fish oil, which is extracted from wild fisheries. And furthermore, through open aquaculture, also drugs, chemicals, and excrement can end up in the environment. Besides that, ocean temperatures are predicted to increase by 1 to 4 degrees by 2021. And of course, these changes are impacting the marine life quite tremendously, because sudden rises in temperature and acidification can lead to the loss of marine habitats and species, and can alter fish stock distribution and also the ecosystem structure. So yeah, so the ecosystem in our oceans might be quite impacted by this increase of temperature, but it's not only a loss of species and ecosystems, it also harms the 3 billion people who live around the sea, on the coast, and live from this industry or oceans. The next slide, please. Yeah, what can you do? What means sustainable fishing? It's pretty easy. It means that enough fish in the sea should be left, yeah, and the habitats and the endangered species should be protected. What should we now consider, yeah, when buying sustainable seafood? So one of the important signs, yeah, if seafood is sustainable, are the two labels you see here on the right side. So try to buy fishery products that be either the MSC or ASC seal, or maybe also check other trustworthy rating systems, but these two seals are quite standard on a global level. So the international MSC, this blue label, is issued by the Marine Steward Council and certifies sustainable wild capture fisheries, as well as retailers which stock sustainably sourced seafood. And the ASC label is issued by the Aquaculture Steward Council and certifies farmed seafood. So that's the difference between these two, or one of the main differences between these two seals, because the one is for wild fishery and the other one is, the ASC label is for aquaculture. Another important tool could be to use fish guides and apps to help to identify sustainable seafood in your country, and that is often very country specific. Maybe we can go to the next slide, because there you see one of the best known fish guides. There are others, of course, too. It's the fish guide from the World Wildlife Fund, which have 20 years of experience, and they have released this fish guide for different countries around the world to support consumers to buy sustainable fish. And they always update that according to the latest scientific findings. So also another, which is not mentioned here, Seafood Watch. It's another organization which has a nice rating system for buying seafood, which could also help for deciding on sustainable seafood. Could you go back, please? Because we did not finish. Yeah. So besides using these fish guides and apps, you should really definitely start to add item, or at least one item of top-rated seafood on the menu. You also need to educate your staff about sustainability and how it impacts your seafood selection, and also learn more about seafood. So these are some recommendations for introducing a more biodiversity-friendly seafood policy. Okay, so next slide, please. Yeah, after biodiversity, we are now going to talk about the water footprint and the water use in tourism. Here you see some figures which might be which might surprise you, because it shows the quantities of water used in tourism businesses. In a hotel, you mostly see the water, in the pool and wellness area, or using the shower or the drinking water. But you might not be aware about the invisible water tourists are consuming. This is the water which is needed to grow the food they are eating on their holidays. And you see here that food is by far the most important water use factor for tourism businesses, which accounts for an estimated 85% of the total water consumption. Next slide, please. Yeah, now we look at the water footprint of different food items. And you can see here quite a big difference between, again, beef and vegetables. So, for example, the production of 1 kilogram of vegetables might require about 300 liters of food, while the production of 1 kilo of beef requires 15,500 liters of water. So it's quite a big difference. And yeah, why is the water footprint of meat products so high? This results mainly from the fact that the animals are plant-eating species, and they accumulate large amounts of water during their lifespan, because this comes mainly from the animal feed to be raised. And so therefore they have this high water footprint, and carbohydrates in fruits and vegetables have a much lower water footprint. So the next slide, please. And now we move to a social dimension of sustainability. We talk about fair trade food, because in a sustainable procurement policy, also the social conditions, such as the wages and working conditions of the workers, have to be considered when we buy food. Unfortunately, small agricultural producers often do not possess enough power to demand acceptable prices for their products. And this is the reason why the concept of fair trade comes into play. Also for fair trade, there exist multiple labels to identify products as fair trades. One of the oldest, you can see it on the right side, one of the oldest and best known is the fair trade label of the Fair Trade Organization, which represents approximately 80% of all certified fair trade products. Or sales, not products, sales. So the label guarantees fair prices and working conditions, and which are regularly reviewed and audited. Next slide, please. Yeah. Now we tackle a very important topic. It's the topic of local food. Which is very important because the local procurement supports also destinations economy, both directly through income and indirectly through creating jobs. Local food lowers transport emissions. It might eventually lower packaging waste, especially when you buy directly from the producer. It helps to protect local food cultures, and it might also provide healthier options of less processed and preserved food. But there is always the challenge for tourism business in holiday destinations to find access to local produce and to build reliable local food supply chains. So the next slide, please. Local food. What food is local? This is really important, but also not so easy to answer question, because there is no official definition of what local food actually means. The Green Restaurant Association in the US defines local food, for example, as food that comes from a distance of below 400 miles. While in Germany, we have a certification scheme which defines food as local when it comes from less than 60 miles. And other definitions exist. So what is considered local depends very much on the destination. And as a rule of thumb, you should always look for the closest food supply you can get. Next slide. Yeah, related to local food is seasonal food, which also provides a number of advantages. Because buying food that is in season means, of course, it's local and it reduces food miles and greenhouse gas emissions. It's also not energy-intensive heated greenhouses, which are needed to grow the fruit and vegetables. Also, fruit and vegetables which are in season are fully mature and have developed a full quota of vitamins and flavor. And that's the reason why seasonal food is often also healthier and tastier. Besides all this, it also strengthens local producers and also enhances an understanding of the local food culture. Next slide, please. Yeah, what can tourism businesses do to increase their share of seasonal food? So first, a very good tool is to use a seasonal calendar, which is very specific also to your region, because this calendar can help you to find out when products are in season and then to develop seasonal meal plans. Where can you find such seasonal calendars? They are very often provided by public and private institutions such as ministries or agricultural associations or food wholesalers. Often you can download these calendars from websites and print them and hang them in your kitchen, so to have it always at hand. Here you can see one example of a seasonal calendar, which is from Maryland in the US, which shows what local foods are available and when they are available. So it's a good guidance what fruits and vegetables are available at the time. So what else should you do? Of course, to develop seasonal menus, because this is not only that it has these environmental benefits, but it also increases the variety of the meals on your menu, and it helps also to communicate the seasonal products to the guests, which appreciate this. Besides develop seasonal menus, you can also replace frozen food with fresh food and seasonal alternatives. Because guests appreciate very much freshly prepared food over convenience food. There are studies on that this is one of the most important factors for holiday makers when it comes to food. Then you should also increase the awareness of guests about seasonal produce, for example, by organizing campaign weeks, or because this really can also inform the guests about the food culture and the cultural meaning of seasonal food. So next slide, please. And now I'm already going to sum up what you can do for sustainable food procurement. So there are three core measures which you should implement. And the first one is addressing the ecological impact of food. So this is a summary now, what I've said. So buy as little as possible, because these food items are highly energy intensive and cause high greenhouse gas emissions. So vegetables from heated greenhouses, beef, using packaging like aluminum foil and so on. Then buy less. Also regular, not important beef, yeah, but deep sea fish, rice, which is also quite water intensive. Buy more of local food, grains, foodstuff with longer shelf lives. So that's one core measure. The second one, and that's next slide, please. The next slide, please. Okay. The second core measure when introducing a sustainable food procurement strategy is to find local suppliers and build local networks, because local grown food is one of the core elements of the sustainable food offer, but the challenges are enormous. There is often a lack of logistics for local producers or for local produce, lack of communication, how and where to source local food. And some local providers are sometimes just too small. But the development of such local networks is of great importance. So how can you find local suppliers? There are many measures, and you see here just a few of them. So search for already existing local food cooperatives, take a study trip to other hotels and benefit from their experience, find out about local producers and their products. This is very important because you could also create other services around these food products and cooperate with the local producers. You can substitute imported goods with local alternatives. So, for example, rice, which is very water intensive, can maybe be substituted by other grains. And you can also, like the example I have shown, harvest from your own hotel, garden, or even farm. There is one best practice example which I would like to share with you. It's, next slide, please. And I will go very quickly through that. It's a project which was done by Futuris in collaboration with the Care Foundation. And it was done in Crete, and the aim was to link local producers and tourism businesses, so to really build up a local sustainable food network. Olive oil and wine are the core products in Crete's food culture. And during this 3-year project, the local farmers, but also the local hotel industry representatives were trained on sustainable farming practices, and they have developed various activities to promote the local and sustainable food culture to their guests. So, for example, with olive oil tastings and excursions to the farms, cooking classes, and so on and so forth. So they did quite lots of activities together. And all these activities contributed to develop a strong local sustainable food network and created business value, but also promoted the Crete food culture. This is also a very nice example of building a supply chain, and it took quite some time to establish this. Now the third core measure, and that's the next slide, is that you should work with your suppliers towards sustainability, because you have a range of both local and foreign suppliers, and you should really review their sustainability from time to time. Sometimes it's beneficial to have supplier scorecards, not to assess only the supplier from an economic or price point. It's also, you can also take into account environmental, social, health, and cultural considerations. So, for example, when the price difference are marginal, then you can really take the supplier with the better sustainability performance. And you should discuss sustainability issues with them, like employee working conditions, fair trade practices, and so on and so forth. Next slide, please. I'm already quite late, I see. It's my last slide, and it refers to the consumer view on this sustainable procurement aspect. These are the results from a survey which we have done among 7,000 German package travelers. And the key results from this survey is that tourists care a lot about local products. And this is really a supporting argument for introducing more sustainable food policies. So local ingredients play a key role. They prefer local dishes, and they prefer preparation of fresh food, and so on. So these tourists support the sustainable food procurement strategy. And with this, I would like to end my presentation, and thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you so very much, Dagmar, for the very clear and comprehensive presentation of procurement approaches, tools, and methodologies. I would like also to remind to our participants, before just taking 2-3 questions and closing this meeting, I would like to remind that our next training will be taking place on 28th of November on the topic of service and guest communication, and also that you can access the recording of the previous training as well as today's training and training materials through the QR code that appears on the screen. And you can also register to the next training sessions through this QR code. So colleagues, we have 5 minutes left. If you have questions to Dagmar, please don't hesitate to send them in the chat. We will do our best to address at least two questions. My first question to you would be, Dagmar, so during your presentation, you covered the topic of local food. So how about regional products? Are there any guidelines and clear definitions when it comes to purchasing of regional products?
Yeah, this is really a difficult point, yeah, and each region or each business actually has to address that. What means local or regional food for them? Sometimes it's predefined. Yeah, there are predefined food regions which are already identified. Yeah, so then it's not really so difficult. It might be at the regional or provincial level. Yeah, so not at the destination level. But sometimes it's really hard to define. Especially when you do not have so much agricultural food produced in the region. Yeah. So what we do in this case is really to have discussions with the stakeholders, like the staff of the hotels, hotel management, other hotels, yeah, and to define together, to discuss and to define together what a regional product for the destination means. Yeah, and this varies very, very much. There is no standard recipe, unfortunately.
Thank you very much, Dagmar, for clarifying this. By the way, I can see in the chat several participants are congratulating and thanking you for the excellent presentation, and colleagues are also asking if the presentation and the material will be shared. Roxana, would you mind resharing the slide, please, with your QR code, and maybe posting also the link in the chat so that colleagues can access the website. So yes, I confirm that today's training session will be uploaded on our website. You can access it through the QR code here, or by using the link that will appear shortly in the chat. So please don't hesitate to share this broadly. And we have another question that appears, and I suggest it will be our last question to you, Dagmar. So any recommendation to source farmers who can propose bioproducts?
Pardon me, I did not understand it properly.
So do you have do you have specific recommendations with regards to sourcing of bioproducts beyond what you mentioned in your intervention? Maybe some key messages.
Yeah.
Organic product sourcing.
Yeah, it's organic product. It's an important food item on your menu. It really can mean a competitive advantage for some hotels. Yeah, but of course it's always a matter of costs. Yeah. As I said, and I gave some recommendations in my presentation. Yeah, it's important that you start maybe with less expensive items, that you maybe also create, for example, organic counter on your breakfast buffet, if you offer buffets, and highlight that you offer these organic products, and to really start with something and then increase the share continuously. And it's also about building up the relationship with organic producers and maybe other organic, wholesalers, and also negotiate prices with them. Yeah, maybe you also enter cooperation with other hotels and get a better negotiation position. Yeah. But I think it's important to start and also to highlight it so that the guests also see, that you have this offer, these organic products on offer. As I said, there are many studies indicating that guests are willing to pay more for organic food offers.
Thank you so very much, Dagmar, for this additional recommendations. I would like to join all of the congratulatory and thank you remarks in the chat, which are many. Thank you so much, Dagmar, for the excellent training session. on behalf of our team of the One Planet Sustainable Tourism Program, you and the video, UNEP, and of course, France. Just before closing, we'd like to remind that our next training session will be taking place on 28th of November on the topic of service and guest communication. So I hope you will be numerous to join us as well for this training session. Thank you all very much for your precious time, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
See you soon.